Students from the University of Missouri and many others gather here today at the state capitol to protest House Bill 937. House Bill 937 works to implement the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which includes legitimate criticism of Israel. Coordinator for the Mid-Missouri Fellowship of Reconciliation, Jeff Stack, believes this bill will ultimately bring more harm for students in Missouri.
I think it's a horrible idea. It stifles freedom of speech for students, puts people at risk for expressing views that they found problems with the state of Israel and with some of what they rightly can say are racist policies. I think it puts people in great danger. We're at a point in time right now where it feels like our state governments, other governments around this country are too often trying to silence Palestinian voices and perspectives.
Sponsor of House Bill 937, Representative George HRA, begins the day with his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman, and the committee for hearing me speak about the bill. It's House Bill 937, dealing with anti-Semitism in schools. Now, I just outlined the components of the bill. It accepts the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, which has been accepted by 35 states, plus the District of Columbia, and 88 localities, including St. Louis County.
Representative HRA believes this bill is necessary due to the current state of anti-Semitism in the U.S., which he thinks is directly caused by the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th.
I've never experienced anti-Semitism being in the United States. And then October 7th happened, the worst day for Jews in the world since the Holocaust. But we had, within a couple of days, we had some pretty rough anti-Semitic activity going on in the United States. It happened within a couple of days of this. And then, of course, you saw the college campuses. My alma mater had one of those encampments and so forth, with Jewish students being told they can't go to class, or they've got to go hide out in buildings. That's just not acceptable. That is not what the United States is all about. And so I'm sad, actually, to have to bring this bill, because I thought we would never have to do that. But we do have to do that, because we've got to make sure that our Jewish students can feel safe and comfortable going to school and not worry about what might happen if they go to class. After October 7th, there's been a 300% increase in anti-Semitic acts against Jews and Jewish institutions. So I think it is timely to take care of this issue now. So I appreciate taking any questions.
My question is just primarily on the definition of anti-Semitism. I see that you've chosen the IHRA definition that in its title is non-legally binding. I ask that because the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism has a different definition, and just to quote briefly from it, it says, because the IHRA definition is unclear in key respects and widely open to different interpretations, it's caused confusion and generated controversy, hence weakening the fight against anti-Semitism. It goes on to say that in the examples given, 7 of the 11 are in the state of Israel alone, which puts undue emphasis in one arena. There's a widely felt need for clarity on the limits of legitimate political speech and actions concerning Zionism, Israel, and Palestine. And the aim of this definition is twofold. I'll be brief, but the aim is just twofold: to strengthen the fight against anti-Semitism by clarifying what is and what is not manifested, and to protect the space for open debate about the vexed question of the future of Israel and Palestine. So I wonder if there's any room to change the definition from the IHRA to the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism.
I appreciate the question. I feel that many have looked at the two definitions, and the IHRA definition, with its contemporary examples, is makes it, in my opinion, much easier to distinguish the issue. It also very clearly states criticism of Israel would not be anti-Semitic.
I echo the sentiment of the previous representative regarding consideration of I don't want to say more concise to be disrespectful, but a more concise widely accepted definition of anti-Semitism. And the reason why that becomes important is because of matters like the DEI bill. I want you to consider, you don't have to answer now because I know this is going to be a lot to chew on. So I'm happy to come to your office and have this conversation with you. But I do want you to consider how this would play with the DEI stuff and with the House Bill 875.
So we say nothing in this legislation, this bill, would interfere with your First Amendment rights. Therefore, that supersedes this bill. So maybe I'm missing something, but that's why we very specifically.
After the questioning period was over for Haruza's sponsorship speech, the floor was open for testimonies on both sides. Many speakers here today were students representing a variety of different organizations.
Hi, my name is Alma Jarbu. I'm speaking in opposition on behalf of 24 student organizations. I don't believe I have time to list them all, maybe at the end. Okay, House Bills 746 and 937, which we're talking about today, seek to implement the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism into Missouri law. The definition has been widely criticized as a dangerous conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Kenneth Stern, who wrote the definition itself, said it was never intended to be included in the law and was simply meant to help better inform the monitoring of anti-Semitism. Stern called the effort to include this definition in state and federal law an attack on academic freedom and free speech. These bills directly violate the First Amendment rights of Palestinian students, Jewish students, and anyone opposed to the 77-year occupation, ethnic cleansing, and land theft of Palestinians by the State of Israel. Even without this dangerous definition being signed into law, Palestinian students, professors, and their allies across the country are targeted and accused of anti-Semitism for simply speaking out against Israel's actions against Palestinians. First of all, this bill blurs the line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and puts both Palestinians and Jewish students at risk. The Israeli government recently pledged $150 million to boost funding for Zionist propaganda on U.S. college campuses in coordination with the pro-Israeli lobbyist organizations in the U.S. UMKC students have voiced their hesitation to register with pro-Palestinian groups, fearing they will be singled out and lose future opportunities. Palestinian students sharing their lived experiences of Israeli violence are often labeled anti-Semitic by pro-Israel students or faculty. Mizzou's own SJP chapter has already been targeted with defamatory attacks by Hillel, Chabad at Mizzou, and Mizzou College Republicans. And finally, equating anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel risks true incidences of anti-Semitic hate towards Jewish students going ignored. Passing House Bill 746 and House Bill 937 will further isolate pro-Palestinian groups, giving those targeting us the legal backing to do so. Passing these bills would expose our respective organizations to false accusations of anti-Semitism, threatening both our funding and official status as recognized student groups. If this happens, the necessary conversations, education, and advocacy work that academic institutions were historically established to cultivate will be lost altogether when it comes to topics such as Palestine.
My name is Haiti Clower. I'm a Jewish Missourian, a grandchild of a Holocaust survivor who grew up like my mother and grandmother immersed in Jewish communities across the state. I'm here to testify on behalf of 3 generations of Jewish constituents, urging you to vote to oppose this bill. It has been condemned by over 100 Jewish, Israeli, and international civil society organizations because it confuses criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. My mother, who could not make it today, works for a Jewish foundation in Kansas City that considered the same definition. There was enough pushback within that foundation that they concluded the IHRA alone is too problematic to characterize anti-Semitism because it cuts off productive discourse and threatens free speech. She would like you to point you to an alternative, the Jerusalem Declaration, which has the support of scores of Jewish scholars and clergy. My mother also works in the same building where people were murdered in an anti-Semitic hate crime a decade ago. I was a student there at the time. To you, she says, if you want to have the backs of Jewish constituents, educators, and students, you cannot commit to legislation like this that is problematic and distracting. And myself, as a leader in multi-generational, multiracial community groups, I think some of the representatives' comments that I heard earlier are right on track. We do not need to pigeonhole legislation by identity groups. We need to stop intersectional hate and discrimination in all forms. By opposing this bill, you are not opposing dealing with the important issue of anti-Semitism. Opposing this bill means you are committed to getting it right. Here's how wrong the IHRA definition gets it. After adopting this, Florida and Cornell began tracking and banning course syllabi that were particularly critical of Israel. At the University of Minnesota, a Holocaust historian's job offer was rescinded over his criticism of Israel. At NYU, Jewish professors were barred from campus for protesting the Israeli government's violence in Gaza. By the way, over 40% of Jewish Americans believe that the Israeli government is committing genocide in Gaza, so they would be targeted by this bill. Across the UK, universities, a study looked at how the IHRA was applied and found that public resources were used on 40 cases of Israel-specific complaints, including threats of legal action, attempt to block events, and actual cancellation of dozens of campus events. None of the cases were substantiated. I'll also mention that a main driver of this bill is an organization that recently publicly defended Elon Musk's Nazi salute. Here in my home state, this bill would target people like my Bibi, my grandmother, who has taught Middle Eastern, Islamic, and Jewish history for over 50 years at Missouri University. She could be subjected to investigations of anti-Semitism for simply teaching histories, scholars, and writings critical of the state of Israel. My Bibi, who also couldn't make the drive with me today, but similarly urges you to vote no on this bill, says, this bill would stifle academic discourse and critical inquiry. It flies in the face of freedom of speech, It would target your students as well. Students who have been directly impacted by Israeli violence or whose families were displaced or killed during the establishment of the State of Israel will be censored, silenced, and punished for simply speaking out about their own lived experience. And I want to say that millions of people in Gaza and the West Bank are facing unimaginable loss. Imagine that if any of your cities, 9 in every 10 homes was destroyed. If of 50 civilians, 1 was killed and 2 were injured. There's so much more to say, and I'm sure others were, but I hope that you will consider not adopting the IHRA definition, and we need legislation that does not silence or pigeonhole political beliefs and instead advances intersectional solidarity and organizing that gives me hope for a better future.
In contrast to many of the testimonies against the IHRA definition, many in favor believe it's a necessary first step.
My name is Sam Zitten. I have the privilege of working with JSU, the Jewish Student Union of St. Louis. I'm here to speak on the behalf of the kids that I work with. The last 50 years or so in America have been a true golden age of tolerance for Jews. That's the age that I grew up in. That's really the age that these teens grew up in, and it's been the status quo in this country for so long. For so many of us, incidents or even hints of true anti-Semitism were few and far between. That all changed on October 7th, 2023. Overnight, these teens began to experience a litany of aggressions, both micro and macro. These were things they literally never had to deal with in their lives prior to October 7th. Anti-Semitism was very much an academic thing to them that they knew about, but they had never experienced, and today it is all too real. I could tell you dozens of stories that I've heard from students like Shauna. One of the high schools I work with reached out to the JSU club at the end of last school year. To their credit, they wanted to sit down with the JSU and hear about the state of anti-Semitism the kids were experiencing. The principal and the district DEI coordinator came to speak. And it was a productive conversation. But there's one moment from that sits with me in particular. At the end of the session, the DEI coordinator asked if anyone had anything else they'd like to add. One girl raised her hand and said, I just want to walk down the hallways of my school wearing my Jewish star that I've worn my entire life without feeling like I'm going to be judged for that. While he could not guarantee that she would not be judged for that, he could at the least guarantee that she would have the right to wear it. After the club, I approached him and thanked him for coming and thanked him for his comment that he made to her, but I asked him a follow-up question, the response to which was scary to me. I asked him, if a student comes up to you next year and says, I feel unsafe or uncomfortable sitting in a classroom with her because she's wearing a genocidal Zionist symbol around her neck, what are you going to say? Do you have an answer to that question? And his face and his silence told me that he did not. This bill is an excellent first step to ensuring that our students don't have to live in that world. It's a world I never imagined that my kids would have to grow up in. And it's the unfortunate reality that we find ourselves in. And anything we can do to prevent that persisting into the future is a worthwhile endeavor.
Sam Berg, representative of a Jewish organization, came to speak on behalf of all those who think this bill will ultimately harm the Jewish community.
My name is Michael Berg. I'm representing Jewish Voice for Peace St. Louis, and our organization vehemently opposes House Bill 937 because of the contemporary examples of the definition, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. It ultimately wrongly isolates anti-Semitism from other forms of oppression, ultimately weakens the fight against anti-Semitism, all forms of bigotry, and does nothing to actually protect Jewish students. If passed, it would be used as a tool to censor Missourians, Americans, in order to protect a foreign country from criticism. It would stifle academic research and students' basic First Amendment rights. I know it's written there that it says it doesn't stop First Amendment rights, but if you actually read the IHR definition in several places, it does, which is the reason the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism was written, to counteract this, and the reason that the person who wrote this, Kenneth Stern, has said this should not be put into law. The IHRA itself is contradictory. First it says holding Jews as collectively responsible for the crimes and misdeeds of the Israeli state, which are great. I agree with this. Jews should not be collectively held responsible for Israel. Then it proceeds to list what is and is not acceptable speech about Israel. Saying, for example, calling Israel racist endeavor as anti-Semitic, comparing any action of Israel to that of Nazis as anti-Semitic, and applying double standards in criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. So which is it? Does Israel collectively represent Jews, or does it not? A soldier who recently got back from Gaza said of his experience, it looked exactly like we were actually the Nazis and they were the Jews. He was heartbroken because of the atrocities he had committed. If this bill passes, could you even quote this article in the Haaretz in the newspaper in Israel? Criticism of a country, even harsh criticism, is not the same as racism. If I said that China was intrinsically racist against Uyghurs and Tibetans, you can argue whether that's true or not. That's very different than doing a racial slur against Chinese people. If you criticize Israel with racial slurs against Jews, that's anti-Semitism. If you criticize the actions of Israel, it is not. I went back and traveled through the lands of Israel and Palestine, and my observation and studies have caused me to objectively conclude that Israel is fundamentally and by design a racist endeavor. If this passes, I'd not be allowed to say this in a university or secondary school. I've seen walls separating Palestinian families from each other, their farms taken. I've seen Palestinians humiliated at checkpoints. I've witnessed family homes demolished. I've been spit at from fanatical Israeli settlers who are walking down the street with Palestinians. I've had friends jailed and murdered for their basic rights. And what has been done in Gaza over the last year and a half is obscene. The dropping of over 6 Hiroshima bombs worth of munitions on people who, in an area twice the size of the city of St. Louis. I feel a moral obligation to speak out against the grave and serious injustice. And I'm not the only one with these experiences. How many Palestinian victims of the state of Israel are going to be silenced if this passes? And how many Jews like myself would be silenced and called anti-Semites for speaking out on campuses and secondary schools if this passes? So this bill that claims to be for the purpose of protecting Jews at universities and secondary schools will disproportionately be used to punish Jews.
College student Destiny Albritton believes this bill does not cause any harm to other groups and serves only to uplift Jewish Americans.
Yes, thank you. My name is Destiny Albritton. I'm a resident of Columbia, Missouri, and I'm a proud friend of the Jewish people. I myself am a Christian. And I ask that you support this bill with the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. This is a tool for teaching about how the Jewish community experiences anti-Semitism in 2025. The Jewish community in America is less than 2% of the population, but they are the targets of the most religiously motivated hate crimes. That's from the FBI. The IHRA definition, it was not written by one person, it was written by a team of experts. It has been used by the Obama administration, by the Biden administration, and by the Trump administration. So no, it's not controversial. The Jerusalem Declaration definition is not more widely used than the IHRA definition, not by respected institutions at least. And using this definition, it sets the standard for what we allow in Missouri schools. It sets the standards for what we say is the acceptable treatment of Jewish Missourians of any age. I really appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate that we're discussing this tonight, but I urge you, listen to what the Jewish community is telling you. The vast majority of the Jewish community supports this. There are statistics on that. And to listen to the Jewish representative who told his experience, and I'll just say this, it was disheartening for me to hear a Jewish representative share his experience and for his intentions to be questioned. That was really disheartening to hear, but I hope that you will continue to listen to the Jewish community, and what they say is discriminatory against them, because we don't treat other minority groups that way.
I just want to be clear to you, I don't think that anybody intended to disparage a well-respected representative. I think they were just questioning and trying to understand. So I don't want you to conflate. Everybody on this side has tremendous respect for him, and so no disrespect at all intended from anybody. Just questions and trying to understand the problem and the solution. That's all. Thank you.
Taking Albritton's advice, representatives of the subcommittee heard testimony from many Jewish residents in Missouri.
Greetings, my name is Mark Hayam. Hayam means life in Hebrew, and I am a Jewish American. I'm somebody who was raised in the Ashkenazi Jewish tradition, Central and Eastern Europe, and like my fellow Jews, no matter what our positions are in Israel-Palestine, we're keenly aware of and deeply opposed to anti-Semitism. We know it when we see it, and that anti-Semitism is something we've been exposed to, all of us in some ways or others, and we know it. But I can assure you, after months of working closely with groups on campus at Mizzou that are working to see a ceasefire and an end to the violence and into the death and destruction, I did not encounter anti-Semitism anywhere along the way. We're told it's happening all over all the time, and I've been around for months. I've been at multiple demonstrations. I haven't seen it once. Most American Jews, including I'm sure most of us who are here today, have lost some members of their families in the Nazi gas chambers. We're keenly aware of what anti-Semitism looks like. Most Americans don't realize that Zionism or Jewish nationalism has historically been contested territory within Jewish communities. Modern Zionism emerged in the late 19th century. It initially received only minority Jewish support. Most Jews living in the West, in Europe, or in the Americas preferred to remain citizens of the countries they lived in. They were not interested in migrating to Mandate Palestine. The Jewish tradition is one that embraces extended debate on issues, be it issues of philosophy, religion, and politics. And just as Jews a century ago debated Zionism, so too today do Jews and others debate this in the present. And that engagement is a basic constitutional right and should not be limited. Questioning policies and actions of Israel, or any state for that matter, is our right, and some would even argue it's our responsibility, it's our obligation. No individual or institution should be penalized for asking questions or sharing ideas. Our colleges and high schools should be abuzz, young minds exploring, a marketplace of ideas.
I'm sorry, but we're going to have to stop
I
you there.
appreciate
Everybody's
that.
got
Thank you
3 minutes.
Thank you for the time.
Begin when ready.
I'm George Smith. I'm an emeritus professor at Mizzou, where I taught in the Division of Biological Sciences for 40 years, so I'm as STEM as they come. HB 937, as you've heard, relies on the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, including all its examples. Anti-Zionists like me strongly object to the IHRA definition, even though we oppose anti-Semitism in all its form. For example, quotes, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. For example, by claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavor. Influential Israeli Jewish scholars of Israel's history, such as Ilan Pappé, argue that establishment of the State of Israel was indeed a racist endeavor. The great majority, 83%, of the indigenous Palestinian people living in what was to become Israel were forcibly and intentionally expelled in 1948. They and their descendants have never been allowed to return to their homes, nor have they ever been compensated for the loss of all their property and means of living. Is this not a racist endeavor? Is it really anti-Semitic to say so? And as you've heard, Kenneth Stern, scholar of anti-Semitism and principal author of the IHRA definition, would disagree with us, of course, but even he argued vehemently against using it to police speech on campuses. when he testified before the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on the Judiciary on November 7th, 2017. Quotes, although discussions around Israel and Zionism may often be uncomfortable for its supporters and detractors alike, he said, it is the responsibility of students and educators to foster dialogue and not limit it. On this point, we agree with Kenneth Stern and with HB 937's admirable emphasis on First Amendment rights, but the bill's reliance on the IHRA's definition to define actionable anti-Semitism betrays its declared commitment to free speech. That's why we implore you to enthusiastically vote against it.
Many testimonies against this bill criticized the IHRA definition and pointed flaws with it. However, some believe a lack of a uniform policy leaves the door open for inconsistencies from universities.
In the congressional hearings that were referenced, presidents of the elite universities, Harvard, MIT, and Penn, refused to say whether calling for genocide of Jews is bullying and harassment, and even going so far as to say that it depends on the context. Common sense isn't very common, and we need this law not only to protect the students from others, but to protect them from the ignorance and the lack of common sense of some administrators. What happens to the Jews can and does happen to others. Douglas Murray, British journalist, said, I find the support of Hamas on American campuses dispiriting. Anti-Semitism, he writes, is the first sign that a society has gone rotten. It's a sign that a society is becoming conspiratorial, stupid, and potentially evil. The IHRA is the gold standard of the definition of anti-Semitism, and I'd like to share with you just 3 of the contemporary examples as it was questioned as to how this might apply. Number 1, calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of radical ideology. Number 2, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming the existence of the State of Israel as a racist endeavor, which has happened repeatedly in campuses throughout the country. Number 3 or 4, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israel policy to that of Nazis. And number 4, referring to one as not being anti-Semitic, but anti-Zionist. So anti-Semitism takes many different forms, and individuals might say, I love Jews, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist. And I would encourage each of you to look at the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism with the contemporary examples. Thank you very much.
To wrap up what was a long day of testimonies, Mizzou's Students for Justice in Palestine president Islina Talla shared her experience as a Palestinian student and touched on points previously made.
I also want to say that safety has been a very big issue for many students, but unlike what we heard today, Palestinians, anti-Zionist Jewish students, and Arabs and their allies have been experiencing this fear, intimidation, and as someone else put it, this feeling of being put to the side far before October 7th. I feel unsafe wearing the kafiyah, the Palestinian scarf, to school, and I've completely stopped to do so because my administration has failed to protect me. I did want to also say that Destiny was kind of right. She said that it doesn't take anything away from her. This bill passing doesn't take anything away from her. It doesn't. It does take away from me as a Palestinian student. It also takes away from anti-Zionist Jewish students that share the same sentiments as I do. They mentioned so many examples of anti-Semitism, but the most common example that I hear from Jewish students that I'm friends with is they're being called self-hating Jews, or you're not a real Jew because you support the Palestinians, and I feel like that's more problematic than anything we've heard here. This bill is a confusing mess, much like the policies Israel uses. It's all by design. The speaker mentioned anti-Semitic activities, and then he said behavior, then went on to name encampments, protests, and things that should be our right as American citizens. We have a right to protest. We have a right to do so however we feel is necessary. This bill not only infringes on our rights to free speech, but it also limits our efforts. As the president of Students for Justice in Palestine, we take our job very seriously on educating what the definition of anti-Semitism is and how to combat it. This limits our efforts, and this ruins all the conversations that we were to have with our fellow Jewish students and other people that might disagree with us. Thank you.
No matter what, Missouri representatives want to ensure students' First Amendment rights are protected. Representative Ray Reed of District 83 stresses the importance of these liberties.
I think the First Amendment is clear, and people should be free to peacefully speak their mind.
Representative Haruza agrees with both Isleen and Representative Reed, as he claims this bill will not violate any protected rights.
Nothing in this bill will infringe on the First Amendment rights of students. You can criticize the state of Israel. That is not anti-Semitism. The speech to talk about Israel in whatever way you want, or even about Jewish people as a protest, that's freedom of speech.
Although Representative Haruza believes criticism of the state of Israel should be allowed, he also believes there's an overlap between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism.
Anti-Zionism, to me, it's really difficult to separate fully from anti-Semitism, because the state of Israel is a Jewish state, majority being Jews there. It's a state that was created, well, they've been there for 3,000 years, but it was created in 1948 by the United Nations, specifically intended for all the refugees that survived the Holocaust. It was the purpose behind that, plus the Israelis that lived there, the Jews that lived there. So when you talk about that we want Israel to be successful, that might be perceived as being Zionist, but that's also supporting the Jewish people. So I find it very difficult, this separation, that you say anti-Semitic versus anti-Zionist.